Hi, welcome back to CompSci.rocks. The next in a series of videos on array algorithms that you'll want to know as you get ready for your computer science AP exam this May. This series goes through the algorithms that tend to show up on the exam and are ones you want to make sure you know going in. This video is going to walk through finding the average of all values in an array. Think about a gradebook that automatically shows the average of your grades. That's the kind of thing we're doing. And this video does build on a previous video where we found the sum of all values in an array. So if you haven't seen that video yet and aren't quite sure how to make that happen, it's probably worth taking a look at that video first. There's a link in the notes below. To find the average, we're going to need an array. So we'll work with this one over the next couple slides. To make this easier, we're going to look at a relatively small array and keep all the values single digit. We'll get that array out of the way so we have some scratch space to work. Now remember back to math class, the average of a bunch of numbers is the sum of those numbers divided by how many numbers there are. So these 8 numbers add up to 35, and we then divide 35 by 8 to get the average, which is 4.375. There is a programming quirk here that we need to talk about though. When Java divides an integer by another integer, the result has to be an integer. Any decimal is truncated. So if we tell Java to add up these 8 integers and then divide by 8, we'll end up with 4 instead of 4.375. The 0.375 just goes away. We'll talk about how to fix that as we work through the code in a bit. And then let's look at some code. Most of the logic is the same as from the array sum video I mentioned earlier. What we're going to do is create the same array as the example and create a variable named sum, which will fill in with the right value by using a for each loop and adding every value. And then we create a double variable named average. Using a double here because I want the decimal. But this is where the integer divided by an integer resulting in an integer problem from earlier comes back in. Average isn't going to hold 4.375 like we'd expect. It's going to be 4.0. But why? We're asking Java to divide 35 by 8, both integer values, which gives us 4. That 4 is then put into a double variable and gets stored as 4.0. The 0.375 decimal we're expecting goes away from the division before it gets put into the double value average. And since double always has a decimal, we end up with 4.0. So 2 relatively easy ways to fix this. First, we can cast the integer on either side of the division as a double, and then the result will be a double. You could cast both, but you don't need to. And I personally prefer to cast the first number because it makes it clear in my head what's happening. But you could cast rate.length instead and it will work just the same. What this does is change the equation from 35 divided by 8 to 35.0 divided by 8, which gives us the right result, which is then stored in average as 4.375. The other option is just make sum a double from the start. This does more or less the same thing and we end up with the right result. And like in previous videos in the series, let's end with wrapping our algorithm into a method so it can be called from other places in our code. I switch back to casting sum as a double at the end because that's the way I prefer to write it, although it really doesn't matter as long as the math ends up correct in the end. And with that, we're at the end. Thanks for stopping by and be sure to check out the other videos in our playlist in this series for help working with arrays in Java as you work your way to a 5 on the AP exam.